السلام عليكم. عالمية معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة تحديات وفرص. لا شك أن عالمية معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة تخدم الغاية الأساسية التي أنشئت من أجلها، ولا سيما مساهمتها الجوهرية في الحد من انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان والقانون الإنساني الدولي وغير ذلك من المقاصد الإنسانية السامية. التجارة هي مصدر، والتجارة هي مستورد، والتجارة هي وسيط، والتجارة هي عبور. وهذه المنطقة تلعب دورا محوريا في كل ما ذكرت: منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، منطقة تعتبر من أكثر مناطق العالم تأثراً بالحروب والنزاعات المسلحة، وهي التي تشكل سكانياً ما يقارب 5% من سكان العالم. أما حجم الاتجار بالأسلحة التقليدية ما يقارب 50% من حجم الاتجار العالمي. في هذه المنطقة 47% من النازحين داخلياً. في هذه المنطقة 57.5% من اللاجئين في العالم. في هذه المنطقة 18% من صراعات العالم بين العام 48 وال2014. في هذه المنطقة 45% من الهجمات الإرهابية، وكان ذلك في العام 2014. أضف إلى ذلك 68% من الوفيات المرتبطة بالصراعات المسلحة. لا شك أن الحد من الاتجار غير المشروع يسهم بتقليص هذه الكارثة الإنسانية في هذه المنطقة. الاتجار يحصل بمعظمه دون ضوابط قانونية كافية، لا محلية ولا إقليمية ولا حتى دولية. وإذا ما جئنا إلى معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة نرى أن لبنان، موريتانيا وفلسطين هي الدول المصدقة التي تعتبر طرفاً كاملاً في هذه المعاهدة، إضافة إلى ليبيا والبحرين والإمارات وجيبوتي وجزر القمر وإسرائيل كدول موقعة. فهذا يظهر بوضوح مدى الإحجام لدى دولنا، دول المنطقة، من الانضمام إلى هذه المعاهدة. الكلمة الأولى لسعادة السفير توماس جوبل، وهو رئيس المؤتمر الثامن للدول الأطراف، وهو الممثل الدائم لألمانيا لمؤتمر نزع السلاح. وأنا لا أنسى إطلاقاً أن الدولة الألمانية قد سبقت جميع الدول الأطراف في المعاهدة لجعلها قيد التنفيذ في العام 2014، وكان ذلك على ما أظن في شهر شباط فبراير 2014، وذلك وفقاً للمادة 23 من المعاهدة، والتي تجيز للدول الانصياع لتطبيق المواد 6 و7 قبل دخولها حيز التنفيذ، والذي حصل مع نهاية 2014. كما لا أنسى دعم حكومة ألمانيا لمسار عمل هذه المعاهدة على مختلف الأصعدة، ومنها المجتمع المدني والمنظمات الإقليمية، حيث كان لنا في حركة السلام الدائم تعاون وثيق مع الخارجية الألمانية على مستوى جامعة الدول العربية. ولا شك أن السفير توماس هو خير من يرأس ويدير أعمال المؤتمر الثامن للدول الأطراف. الكلمة له، فليتفضل.
Yes, thank you, Fadi, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, Excellencies, colleagues. First of all, thank you for this kind words of introduction. I think there is a lot of pressure you put on me as the presidency of the CSP8, and I hope we will be able to be responsive. But I want also I would also like to thank Control Arms and the organizers for inviting me to this panel, focusing on a region, and you just explained it a little bit to us, which is certainly in need of for effective arms transfer and small and armed light weapons controls, as it is heavily affected region. So I'm far of being an expert of the region, and I'm also hoping to even learn by participating in this panel. But you mentioned it in your introduction, and I think a look into the news makes it more than obvious to everybody that that the Middle East and North Africa continues suffering under a range of armed conflicts that are fed by licit and illicit arms flows. And these arms flows and their ammunition, as I would like to underline, are fueling civil wars and other conflicts, such as those in Syria, Yemen, and Libya, just to name a few. And during and after conflicts, we also see the diversion of these weapons and their ammunitions, endangering the neighboring states and fueling the proliferation in the wider region, not to speak about the diversion to terrorist organizations. But there's another reason why we need to have a closer look at the MENA region, and this you also mentioned already in your introduction. I think a look at the map of the ATT website shows quite a number of blank spots with regard to memberships that are also found in this region. So taking into account that one of the tasks of every CSP presidency is the universalization of the treaty, you can easily see that a lot of work remains to be done, but I come to that later. So this very short introduction shall lay the ground for the further thoughts I would like to share with you regarding the need for better standards in both arms transfers and arms controls. There is a clear need for effective processes for both arms procurement and arms import controls to ensure that any arms acquired are in line with national needs and reach their intended end users, and perhaps even more important, and remain with them and are not diverted. So the international community has built and continues to maintain a comprehensive set of international treaties, guidance, and reporting instruments in the field of arms transfers and small arms and light weapons, detailing the key systems that states should have in place in order to exercise effective control over the manufacture, storage, sale, transfer, or disposal of conventional arms and small and arms light weapons. And there are also there were also quite a substantial number of arms transfer and small arms and light weapons focused cooperation and assistance activities involving states from the Middle East and North Africa in recent years. And I think many of these activities are focused on helping states to implement either the UN Program of Action or the ATT. So the EU has been, for example, active in promoting active arms transfer controls in the region, where its COARM outreach program, which is being carried out by the German BAFA, the Export Control Agency, the German Export Control Agency, which are aimed at promoting effective arms export control policies in the North African countries and the European neighborhood policy. but also NATO, through its Partnership for Peace Trust Fund mechanism, has provided assistance to partner countries in the field of small arms and light weapons, mine and ammunition. These activities have certainly led to a broader awareness of the problem, of the instruments at hand, as well as the better knowledge of cooperation and assistance possibilities. And so we have certainly to continue with these projects of awareness raising and capacity building. It is certainly not one of the merits, I would say, amongst others, of the last ATT presidency of Sierra Leone, to initiate a rich thematic discussion within the ATT on small arms and light weapons and stockpile management, showing how this subject should be articulated and addressed in the context of the ATT, and bridging existing gaps, at least at a regional level, between the various instruments. The ATT community should explore further synergies between various instruments and initiatives, such as the United Nations Program of Action, but also others like the International Tracing Instrument, the Firearms Protocol, or others. I think we will, as an ATT community, have to make full use of the input of the CSP7 presidency, which is laying the ground for, which has been laying the ground for several decisions in this regard, which will be pursued and implemented under the German presidency. And one of the tasks, namely to formalize discussions concerning post-delivery cooperation experiences from both exporter and importer perspective, will be at the core of the German presidency. So while the universalization of the ATT remains a challenge, it's certainly not limited to the MENA region only. And as I said, the CSP presidency, this is one of the main tasks we have to fulfill. You know, also 110 states are party to the treaty, and a further 31 have signed it. A number of important arms producers have not formally pledged their commitment to the ATT rules for arms trade. And so Germany will work relentlessly to convince those states and a number of other bystanders that is in their very own interest and that of their people to help create a binding legal framework for international arms transfer. The understanding of the ATT's objectives amongst non-state parties is certainly key to promote further universalization, as the ATT is very often falsely perceived as an disarmament treaty. So, and this might be especially the case when it comes to the MENA region. I've read that states of the Middle East and North Africa, which were heavily involved in the process of consultations and negotiations leading up to the ATT, were quite vocal during those consultations about their concerns that that the treaty might limit their ability to acquire adequate arms to ensure their national defense. This might be an important point to start with, because even if it might seem to be a little bit contradictory, but I think we have to inform how and why the ATT allows for legal arms transfers also to the MENA region. So this information, I think, is very important to promote further accession to the ATT. The EU funding of the publication of the ATT Universalization Toolkit, which was prepared by the ATT working group on treaty universalization, will play a vital role in further promoting the ATT and its goals and explaining what is necessary, the very true nature of the treaty. And thanks to the efforts of North Korea, we have this very valuable tool in all the different languages available yet. To universalize the treaty and to universalize it, especially in the MENA region, is all the more a matter of concern, as a number of states in the region rely heavily on imports for the acquisition of conventional arms and small arms and light weapons. Vadi said it already in his introductory remarks. And they are amongst the biggest arms importers of the world. And while engaging with the states in the region has to be continued to guarantee inter alia for adequate stockpile management, we have to concentrate also on the exports to the region. On the one hand, we have to continue convincing the states of the region of the merits of controlled and transparent arms transfers, adopting the standards spelled out explicitly in the ATT and also addressed in the other instruments I already mentioned. On the other hand, we have to concentrate on means and ways to make any export to the region more safe, to avoid any possibility of legal arms export falling into the hand of terrorists or illegal armed groups in the end. And as I already said, the latter will be at the core of at the heart of our ATT presidency. We would like to sponsor a thematic discussion on the subject of on-site verification and post-shipment controls during our presidency. Germany considers post-shipment controls to be an effective instrument and confidence-building measure to fight illicit trade in conventional arms and to prevent their diversion, an obligation all states parties have undertaken in accordance with Article 11 of the treaty. Germany has introduced post-shipment controls for a certain number and certain categories of arms, especially those that are easily divertible, such as small arms, since already 2015. The German instrument for performing selective post-shipment controls for deliveries to third countries of war weapons and specific weapons of firearms supplements since then the already strict application of the political principles adopted by the German for the export of war weapons and other military equipment. So we would be pleased to share our experience, which we regard as an effective measure to build confidence between exporting and importing states. And we would like to start a process encouraging others to develop similar practices. So our plans regarding this priority subject of the German presidency are not completely finalized yet. However, we intend to organize a series of workshops and seminars to speak about and to share our experiences. The outcome could be a sort of a best practice guide or a sort of a handbook identifying the prerequisites and the challenges for an effective implementation of PSC. So as a conclusion, what we certainly need is before and above all effectively fighting the root causes of illicit trafficking of arms in the region. It has, which is armed conflicts and civil wars. I think we all agree this is a challenge which is certainly far beyond the scope and the possibilities of a treaty like the ATT. But remains a major task of the international community. When it comes to the ATT, there are two angles the ATT community can address the situation. What we can do is continuing to inform about the treaty, eradicate misperceptions, giving the support for building up necessary infrastructure and legislation to fight effectively the illicit flow of weapons, making full use of synergies between the different instruments at hand. This with a few that is clear with a few component states of the regions to accede to the relevant treaties and conventions as to the ATT. And we have to engage with relevant exporters to the region in promoting efficient instruments that can help to make sure that legal arms transfers to the region do not fall in the end in the wrong hands. This is a process that is clear that it is needs a cooperation, that it has to include the states of the region, and which is technical and legally challenging. And that's why we would like to engage in a discussion on this process and on the possibility and the possible merits of post-shipment controls and online verification within the ATT. So that's the program, and we are looking very much for your support. And now I'm here to listen and to learn from you about the region and the concerns in order to make full use of these contributions in the preparation of our presidency. Thank you very much.
شكرا سعادة السفير قبل على يلي تقدمت فيه. الحقيقة اليوم نحن عم نشهد بداية حوار غير رسمي من جديد مع هالمنطقة. وقت تسمع منك أنك عم تعكس هموم وشجون ونظرة هالمنطقة تجاه المعاهدة، ولا سيما وقت كنت عم بتشير لكيف العالم بمنطقة الشرق الأوسط عم ينظر لهالمعاهدة إنها هي معاهدة نزع سلاح بالوقت اللي هي معاهدة التجار، وكيف هالمعاهدة ممكن إنها تحد من قدرات الدول على تعزيز قدراتها الدفاعية. فأنا بعتقد هالكلام يلي عم ينقال ومن ما هو متوقع الآن مع سعادة السفير دكتور حسام الدين، عم برجع حسام الدين علي رح ارجع اشوف المشهد يلي كان قائم بالحوار والتفاوض اثناء التحضير للمعاهده، انما للاسف بعد اقرار المعاهده ودخولها حيز التنفيذ شفنا هالحوار توقف. كان ممكن يستمر يمكن بشكل موازي للمؤتمرات الرسميه، وقد يكون المهم المتوقع بالايام الجاي تنظيم يمكن حوار موازي لهذه المنطقة، قد يكون مفيد جدا. سعادة السفير حسام الدين علي هو سابقا على ما أعلم ما طلب من سعادة السفير يعطيني خلفية، أنا كلفت حالي أني أقول يلي بعرفه. هو أحد أعضاء الوفد المفاوض أثناء المفاوضات للمعاهدة ما يقارب يمكن 8 سنوات، وهو اليوم مساعد وزير الخارجية المصرية للشؤون الإسرائيلية. أثناء التفاوض الوصول إلى هذه المعاهدة كان لي فرصة التعرف إلى سعادة السفير الدكتور حسام الدين علي، حيث كان ضمن فريق عمل البعثة المصرية لدى الأمم المتحدة، وكان النجم العربي المحترف الذي كان يتطرق للهموم العربية وفقاً للمضامين المبدئية في المعاهدة كما لمختلف الزوايا التقنية فيها. وفي الكثير من المواقع كان يؤخذ بأقواله، ولا أبالغ بالقول أنه كان أحد صانعي هذه المعاهدة. وهون شفنا الاعتراف من سعادة السفير الرئيس توماس كوفيل أنه ما حصلت الاتفاقية أو المعاهدة بين دول بدها إياها بدون أن تأخذ بعين الاعتبار شو كان عم بيسجول من مخاوف وهموم لدى كل دول العالم وبشكل أساسي منطقة الشرق الأوسط شمال أفريقيا. وباعتقادي أن سعادة السفير حسام الدين علي الأجدر بالكلام عن أهم معوقات عدم الانضمام إلى هذه المعاهدة من الطرف العربي بشكل أساسي في منطقة الشرق الأوسط شمال أفريقيا. الكلام لك سعادة السفير الدكتور حسام الدين علي، فلتتفضل.
شكرا جزيلا اخي العزيز فادي، وشكرا يعني لكلماتكم الرقيقه. اسمح لي نظرا لان معظم المشاركين يتحدثون الانجليزيه ان اتحدث الانجليزيه ايضا حتى نستطيع ان ندير حوارا معهم يكون اقرب ما يكون له. So at the outset, I want to thank you personally very much, Fadi. I want to also commend very much the efforts of Control Arms in putting together this round table, which I think is timely and important. And I must say, I was also very glad when we had the testing last week, just to see how the connection is going and so on, that the advice to me was to be honest and to talk out to speak out the position as it is. So I'm going to do this. I do this in my personal capacity. I was indeed the identified the member of the group of governmental experts that Egypt nominated for this task. It was a very interesting and very rich task, looking into the feasibility of having the treaty discussed and considered within the United Nations. So this was 2008, and of course, you know, then all the phases afterwards, which I was part of until maybe a month or two before the final conference that adopted that treaty. I had moved back from New York to Cairo. So I'll speak to you from my personal experience, of course. It seemed to me that, of course, there are, of course, very good things about this treaty, but also some very disturbing facts that we need to look at. So allow me to review this quickly. For example, among the facts that this has been, the entire process has really been driven by very able diplomats and very experienced people, on top of which Ambassador and dear friend Roberto Garcia Moritan. I think he championed this very well. He put it forward. He carried it through in a very impressive way, along with many other diplomats on both ends. That end supporting the treaty, the supporters, and the other end of those who are not very excited about it, who maybe didn't understand exactly what the supporters wanted to do or aimed at, or those who are very skeptic about the treaty, including many countries as well, including mine. And why is that the case? I will maybe review with you this very briefly. As you very rightly mentioned, we look today 6 years after entering into force, or 5 years after entering into force, 7 years after entering into force, we have very worrying numbers. Obviously, the treaty is not heading towards anywhere near universality as we may think it is. We have just 110 countries out of 195 member states of the United Nations. We have 54 countries that didn't even sign the treaty and will obviously not do it now. We have 31 countries that just signed the treaty but not ratified. And I think all this is for a very obvious reason. So as we stand now, almost 1/3 of the international community did not even think of signing the treaty. Even those who signed the treaty and ratified it, we have very serious questions if they have been actually implementing it. Nobody has any idea if they have been doing that. Some presented reports, others didn't present reports. Some reports make sense. There is no verification of the reports, whether they are actually correct or not. Of course, there are many questions in this regard, but I will get back to that later. Let me maybe start before putting forward any of those concerns to say that there are, of course, few good things about the Arms Trade Treaty. A very important thing about it that it has been negotiated and adopted within the United Nations system. This is something that is very important. Also, that it reflected some strong partnership with the civil society that I thought was a very helpful one. Has this partnership put more weight on the moral dimension of this treaty against its value or its role or its effectiveness in other areas such as security, commercial interests, right to acquisition of weapons. I don't know, we remain to see. Has been a gradual process. It moved through phases, but it is my personal impression that there was a very strong push to adopt this text for the treaty uh, uh, much before it was ripe to be adopted. I think that the final and most important thing about it, the treaty, of course, was put forward by first a number of countries promoting the transfer control initiative, and then putting forward the Arms Trade Treaty initiative. The UK championed this, and then, of course, there was this process to try to put it forward. The good thing is that the treaty has not been boycotted. Many of the countries that have been that today did not join it actually have been very vocal throughout the negotiation process. They were engaged. So the good thing is that there was very strong engagement from everyone, and some key countries. I can mention Russia, China, Egypt, India, Pakistan. They were on board. They had ideas, very concrete ideas, very helpful one, and they were very positive throughout the process. My impression is that there has been a very strong push, nevertheless, to disregard much of the concerns flagged and to put forward a treaty that is reflecting only one mindset, but one that is not reflecting the concerns of everyone. So I spoke about the process. I think that the process, there has been, let me say, maybe the more relevant word, manipulation of process. So the timing of this deciding on if it was ripe or not, or the treaty has been ready to be adopted or not. I think the treaty needed more work on it, and needed to accommodate the views of many others. But I think the group of governmental experts identified regarding this issue an extremely important condition. And I will recall a paragraph 16 of the report of the group of governmental experts. And this was one that was negotiated very long, and found its way to the report as one of the central findings of this report when looking into feasibility. Paragraph 16 of the GGE report basically says that the treaty would be feasible, or that the feasibility of an arms trade treaty would be dependent on its collectively agreed objectives. My feelings throughout the negotiations was like different people wanted to do different things with this treaty, and there was a good group of countries who had no idea what the discussion was about. This is something that is true. I don't think we did a fantastic job with this. Also, a feasibility of an arms trade treaty was seen in this paragraph 16 as to depend fully on its resistance to political abuse. If a treaty will set measures that countries will individually implement without any verification, or without any supervision, or without any guarantee that they will implement it away from political abuse, I think this was not the best recipe for universalization, but this is what really unfolded. Also, the potential for universality was very much seen as an integral condition of the feasibility of the treaty. So rushing with a treaty that would end up with a limited number of members, and specifically looking at the nature of this treaty, you're talking about the arms exporting countries. How many of the members of the treaty are arms exporting countries who have to make decisions, who have to abide by the standards it sets? You will see that we really have a problem with this in this regard, and we have overlooked a very key condition. We ought to work together better, end up with something that is acceptable to a larger sector of people, and address the major weaknesses of the treaty, where it is not only addressing moral and humanitarian concerns, which we of course support fully, but that this would be coupled with equally effectively addressing verifiability of commitments under this treaty, and this is the security dimension and requirement for other countries, and also looking at the correct scope and parameters of that treaty. So maybe this is a fast look at the process. Let me look at also with you at the form. This treaty is a very, very specific, unusual treaty in many ways. And let me explain perhaps why. Most treaties look at, bring forward commitments. Either all member states would be committed to one thing, or that they would be committed to different things that are mutually enforcing to fulfill the objective. In this treaty, only countries that are arms exporting countries are the ones who will be implementing it, and they will be implementing it individually, not collectively, in the absence of any body that guarantees that they're doing the right thing and that they are sincere and honest in doing that, and that their application of the standards of the treaty that identified in the treaty has been sincere and has not been politically abused in any way. So this complete balance, a complete lack of balance of commitments has been a very disturbing thing. So actually, if you take a few steps back and look at this regime, the way it speaks, you're looking more at an export control regime, only that the targets of that regime are either members as well or non-members. So looking at it this way, like if the export control regime will just combine arms exporting countries, the treaty has combined them and the countries against which the treaty will be implemented. So I'm a member of the treaty, or theoretically a country would be a member of the treaty, but it's subject to the treaty as well that will be implemented by another country. So, and for what is this the case? So the country, the member country that is more on the recipient end, a potential importer of arms, is actually better off outside of the treaty, because that being inside the treaty doesn't guarantee anything and doesn't provide any additional reward, as you say. This is the other maybe thing I want to say. The treaties have incentives. So countries join treaties because there's a reward for membership. It addresses a certain priority. It puts forward a certain gain. It shows the correctness of implementing morally important practices in the right way. But in the treaty, there is absolutely no seen or tangible rewards for membership. If a country is not a major exporter, being inside the treaty doesn't really appear to be paying off much. And maybe that's why a very significant number of the major exporters remain outside the treaty. Has this been a good thing? I don't know. Bundling a number of exporters inside a treaty while the rest of the world is outside that treaty, has this treaty actually then contributed much universal value? I don't know. We need to think of that. But some questions just comes straight to mind when we look at this treaty, also in terms of form, like compared to any other treaty. Who implements this treaty? Individual countries that implement it and have a moral obligation to do exactly what the treaty says to do without any treaty. So this treaty, the way it stands, it is asking countries to just look into their exports and make sure the exports will not be going into the wrong hands and so on. And it is finding it sufficient for those exporting countries to do that without giving any guarantee, while not adding an equal guarantee to the other side. Let me give you an example. For example, if country X wants to export to country Y, country X would have the right to reject the request of import by country Y without any explanation. However, the country Y would not be put in a position of assurance that the decision taken against it is correct or matching the treaty or void from political abuse. It could very much be understood as such. So it will be more keen on avoiding that situation. For example, also the implementing country will say, I'm not going to give arms to a country with the risk of giving it to a third country. That would be just enough, and that country will make its decision without any guarantee that it did it sincerely and honestly, while the recipient country would not suffice to say, I will not move it to third, or give a written commitment in the transaction to say, I will not move this to a third hand. So the treaty gives an advantageous unique situation for the arms exporters in this treaty, while it doesn't give anything else. Actually, it undermines the credibility of others that might be on the recipient end. And if these give commitments that they also will respect the treaty and implement it according to its standards, it will not be enough, because actually they do not have room to implement the treaty. So I think this is very important. So who implements the treaty? We spoke of this. Who verifies the treaty? Nobody. And what do we do in cases of violation? Absolutely nothing. So the way the treaty stands, it is void of this collective supervision of implementation. It is void of actions that would be consequences for violations. It is just not there. It is like a code of conduct adopted by an individual country deciding to do it and deciding sometimes for political reasons to ignore it. And this happens without the treaty, and it's exactly the thing that happens under the treaty, so, or could happen under the treaty. So this is the thing. And of course, I of course hope that you are not concerned with the honesty in my talk, because I think this is exactly, if you're trying to address the issue of universality, you really need to hear others, and you really need to hear why it's not happening. And I think that this can only happen through a straightforward discussion of the issues, rather than addressing it indirectly or beating around the bush without really nailing the main problems we look at. So do we actually have guarantees again that of transparency for this treaty? I don't think we do. So does a country say that country Y requested this category of weapons, and we looked into these criteria, we discovered that this criteria is not verifiably not applicable to that case, so we rejected this, and we can tell every other country about that? I don't think we have anything like that. It's very far. So what guarantees do we have against political abuse, identified basically as an essential requirement for the treaty's feasibility and potential universality? We don't have any guarantees against political abuse. So we are talking about, as it stands today, a regime with no controls, with no secretariat, no verification mechanism, a system that is somehow full of kind, nice, promising humanitarian objectives, but lacks very much elements that are sought by countries. A country implementing a treaty needs a treaty that looks and takes on board its concerns, security concerns, commercial concerns, concerns relating to its essential rights to acquire arms, to practice freedom in this regard, and to do that with standards that are understood by all and that are applied in a collective manner and that are verifiable, and the standards, the violation of which would entail punitive measures, if you allow me, of some sort, so that the treaty would be credible and would stand solid as an effective tool. We don't have today. So let me very briefly try to sum up. So as it looks today, the treaty, of course, is a treaty with a very important moral aim that attempts to regulate a commercial activity with no understood parameters that are verifiable, transparent enough, or no guarantees against political abuse, and no mechanisms of verification or of addressing violations of the treaty. It has no rewards for membership and has no incentives for it. And let me, Fadi, just touch on that. Basically, the entire train of the treaty went along by a number of countries who just foresaw the treaty in the shape it stands today. Many ideas were put forward by countries that were less enthusiastic or were skeptic about the treaty in that form, but they were ignored. I can maybe remind you, remember during the open-ended working group, Ambassador Mauritania established 3 working groups. I was asked to chair the working group on implementation. There was one on scope, other on parameters, and the third was on implementation. I consulted with many countries, including those that were not very were not very keen about the treaty in its present form, and that had their own skepticism. I put a lot of ideas from those countries and mine in that paper that was presented by that working group. That paper doesn't exist today. It's been hidden from everywhere. Even if you look on websites of reference, you have a very big problem finding it, although it's a very important document along the way until we arrive to this treaty. So there, I think the predominant obsession of ending up with a treaty, the way it was put forward on the table from day one, with very minimal cosmetic changes here or there, has led this process, ending with the treaty the way it stands today. Is this the end of the story? No, I think we have two things to do. I would talk about now just more on the positive side. I put forward criticism and I put my personal thoughts on this. This is my personal thoughts as the main person from my country engaging in negotiations throughout this treaty till the very last phases. But I can tell you we have to take two tracks. One track, of course, is an implementation that countries implementing this treaty have to provide for non-members every possible guarantee of transparency. They have to implement it very transparently. They have to gain the treaty credibility through this correct implementation. Countries today would look with suspicion, countries that are not inside the ATT look with suspicion to the Arms Trade Treaty. If you make sure that you show them that the Arms Trade Treaty is not an instrument of political abuse against them, it is not an instrument of fulfilling political agendas that do not relate to the scope of the treaty, that it is effectively put forward, that countries who implement it are not shy from saying how they implemented it and against what measures and why they made certain decisions. If you make sure that countries can put forward reports that are credible and make sense, I think we can slowly build recognition and credibility for this treaty. But will it be enough? I don't think so. And it's good that the treaty itself has foreseen, in, I think, Article 20, has foreseen the chance of amending the treaty. So if you tell me what exactly would be maybe more feasible to move forward, I tell you how we have to look into this, or you have to look into this, countries that are inside the ATT. You have to look at the major gaps, the big holes I referred to in my brief intervention, and say how we address them. How can this treaty be verifiable? How can it be transparent? How can it be implemented by everyone? What exactly are the non-exporting countries doing in this treaty? What are they benefiting from, and what guarantees do they have being on board? So this is basically a very sincere review of this. My highest respect to Control Arms and to the key people contributing to this. My sincere best wishes to Ambassador Thomas Goebel. I think he is aware, and I understand from his intervention, he's aware of the picture and what we do. I don't envy him regarding the universalization dimension of the conference, but I think we all understand it is what it is. We have a problem today because of rushed efforts to bring a treaty into existence much faster than it was ready to be adopted, and to push and pursue one certain format for this treaty without listening to others that have engaged actively into the negotiations of this treaty for well over 7 years, and ending without them on board. So I think maybe we still have the chance. Good that the treaty looks at this possible review and amendment to address those holes. And I would invite, I think this can be the best way to do. Countries that are engaged in negotiations, I think, remain engaged in this issue. Issues are the objectives are important. The humanitarian dimension is one we respect highly. We engaged in very positively, well beyond this treaty and everywhere else. So a good discussion is always positive. It builds confidence. It shares experiences. It provokes helpful discussions that allow us to put our hands on exactly where the problems are and how to address them. So I say this, and with this, I thank you so much. I hope you bear with me my honesty and my sincerity in putting this forward. But I thought this was my task, and I made sure I presented in good faith. And I thank you very much for this and for control.
شكرا جزيلا سعادة السفير دكتور حسام الدين علي على اللي تقدمت فيه. وأنا بدي أنطلق الحقيقة من تعبير مر مداخلتكم، هي الدول التي لديها التزام أخلاقي ليست في حاجة لهذه المعاهدة. وأيضا هنا نقول الحروب بمعظمها إن لم يكن جميعها ليست أخلاقية، وبالتالي السلوكية تضبط بإثنان، إما الأخلاق وإما القانون. فلا بد من المعاهدة، والطريق إلى المعاهدة نأمل أن تكون سالكة لتكون لعولمة المعاهدة أن تكون سالكة. فمن هالمنطلق مع القانون والقانون الدولي الإنساني الأستاذ الدكتور عمر مكي، وهو باحث بارز في القانون الدولي الإنساني، يشغل الآن منصب المنسق القانوني الإقليمي للجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر للشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا. وهو المستشار مكي أيضا قاضي مصري، إلى جانب مجموعة من الشهادات العليا، يحمل شهادة الدكتوراه في القانون الدولي. وتناولت أطروحته موضوعا فائق الأهمية، وهو تعزيز امتثال الجماعات الجهادية الإسلامية لقوانين الحرب المعترف بها دوليا. أصدر وحرر العديد من الكتب، ومنها القانون الدولي الإنساني في النزاعات المسلحة المعاصرة، ودليل تدريب القضاة على أحكام القانون الدولي الإنساني. الكلمة لك دكتور عمر مكي، فلتتفضل.
طيب، بشكر طبعا السيد فادي بوعلم على تقديمي للكلمة، وشكر موصول طبعا لفريق عمل كنترول أرمز على هذا التنظيم الرائع، وعلى طرح موضوع بهذه الدرجة من الأهمية على المجال العام للنقاش. يمكن زي ما حضراتكم عارفين الشرق الأوسط نال الحظ الأكبر من المحن والمآسي الإنسانية، سواء كان ذلك بسبب نزاعات مسلحة دولية أو غير دولية، أو حتى غيرها من حالات العنف والاضطرابات الداخلية. وكان مؤدى ذلك للأسف الشديد للعديد من القتلى والجرحى والأسرى والمحتجزين والمفقودين والنازحين وغيرهم من الفئات المستضعفة، وذلك حتى لا نتحدث عن ممتلكاتنا المدنية وما أصابها من دمار وخراب، ولا سيما الممتلكات الثقافية منه. وفي الحقيقة في إطار عمل اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر من أجل حماية ضحايا النزاعات المسلحة وحالات العنف الأخرى ومساعدتهم في ميادين القتال المختلفة في المنطقة، كانت اللجنة شاهد على التكلفة البشرية والاجتماعية الباهظة بسبب انتشار الأسلحة التقليدية على نطاق واسع وسوء استعمالها. وده طبعا سهل ضعف عمليات مراقبة الأسلحة على المستوى الدولي، وقوع انتهاكات للقانون الدولي الإنساني زي ما حضرتك تفضلت، والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان طبعا، وأطال أمد النزاعات المسلحة، وساهم أيضا في انعدام الأمن حتى بعد انتهاء النزاعات المسلحة. وده طبعا أعاق أي محاولات للمصالحة أو إعادة الإعمار، وده شيء يشهد عليه أي شخص عايش أو يعمل في المنطقة. والنهارده مع استمرار تدفق الأسلحة إلى بعض دول النزاعات المسلحة الأكثر وحشية في المنطقة، تعد عمليات نقل الأسلحة المسؤولة أو المنظمة ضرورة إنسانية، وتعتبر القيود المفروضة على عمليات النقل المنصوص عليها في معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة، على الرغم طبعا من كل التحفظات والتحديات والنقاط اللي أنا أعتقد أنها سليمة وسديدة اللي طرحها سعادة السفير منذ قليل. تعد القيود المنصوص عليها في معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة عنصر أساسي في أي استجابة إنسانية. والجدير بالذكر أن القيود دي سواء المنصوص عليها في المواد 6 أو 7 أو حتى المادة 11 المتعلقة بتحويل واجهة الأسلحة لا تعكس فقط ما تم الاتفاق عليه من قبل المجتمع الدولي في معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة في 2013، ولكن بتعكس أيضا المبادئ والالتزامات القانونية الراسخة في عقيدة ووجدان المجتمع الدولي منذ أكثر من 70 سنة. وأخص بالذكر هنا المادة الأولى المشتركة في اتفاقيات جنيف الأربعة العام 1949، الاتفاقيات التي صدقت عليها كل دول العالم في منطقتنا وخارج منطقتنا، يعني هو التزام قانوني وليس أخلاقي حتى، والذي تلزم كافة أطراف الاتفاقية سواء أطراف النزاع أو الأطراف الثالثة من الدول الداعمة التي لا تشارك في النزاع بشكل مباشر بأن تحترم بل وتكفل احترام القانون الدولي الإنساني. وبلا أدنى شك تعد الدول التي تنقل الأسلحة في موقف مؤثر جدا على كفالة احترام القانون الدولي الإنساني، نظرا لقدرتها على توفير الوسائل أو الأسلحة التي قد ترتكب بها الانتهاكات أو بمنعها عن الحصول على تلك الأسلحة. وهنا يشمل إلزام الدولة بكفالة احترام القانون الدولي الإنساني نوعين من الالتزامات وفقا لتفسير اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر: التزام سلم بالامتناع عن تشجيع أحد أطراف النزاع على انتهاك القانون أو مساعدته بأي صورة من الصور، والتزام إيجابي باتخاذ جميع الخطوات المناسبة لمنع ارتكاب الانتهاكات أو إيقافها. وبطبيعة الحال النوعين من الالتزامات بيطلبوا من الدولة أن تجري تقييما، الأول عما إذا كان المتلقي من المرجح أن يستخدم الأسلحة لارتكاب انتهاكات القانون الدولي الإنساني، وثاني حاجة وأن تمنع الدول عن نقل الأسلحة إذا كان هناك خطر كبير أو واضح لوقوع الانتهاكات. ومن ثم كل تلك الالتزامات تم بلورتها واستكمالها بواسطة معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة، اللي مش بس أكدت على المحظورات السالف ذكرها، ولكنها أيضا أضافت مجموعة من الآليات التي تضمن تنفيذها على المستوى الوطني، تاني على الرغم من السوءات والعوار الكبير وضعف آليات التنفيذ اللي أعتقد اللي هو ممكن يكون مشترك في أغلب قواعد القانون الدولي، مش في معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة فقط. وهنا أنا بتكلم على نظام المراقبة لتنظيم عملية النقل، أو إعداد قوائم الأسلحة والمواد المشمولة بالمعاهدة، أو حفظ سجلات الترخيص والتصدير وإعداد تقارير وتبادل المعلومات وغيرها. كل ده أعتقد أن هو محتاج أن يتم التفاعل معاه بشكل مختلف، وربما دي برضو إحدى الدعوات اللي تفضل بها سعادة السفير. لذلك اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر دعمت وتدعم معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة سواء أثناء مرحلة الصياغة والإبرام في 2012 و2013 أو حتى بعد دخولها حيز النفاذ في 2014. ونحن الآن يعني في حوارنا الثنائي مع الدول في المنطقة وخارجها، سواء جوه أو خارج المنطقة، نحث الدول المصدقة بالوفاء بالتزاماتها وفقا للمعاهدة، وبالنسبة للدول الموقعة نشجعهم على الانضمام أو على الأقل.
دكتور عمر لو سمحت سلولي بليز، شوي للترجمة.
أنا آسف معلش. وبالنسبة للدول غير الموقعة بنحاول إن احنا نشجعهم على الانضمام واحترام جوهر ومضمون المعاهدة بحد أدنى، ودي طبعا اتفاقية فيينا للمعاهدات الدولية. أما بالنسبة للدول غير الموقعة بندعوهم دائما أبدا لإعادة النظر في هذا الموقف. ونحن سعداء كلجنة دولية للصليب الأحمر بكنا جزء من مجموعة من الدول والجمعيات الوطنية للصليب الأحمر والهلال الأحمر ومنظمات المجتمع المدني التي تعمل على تعزيز الوعي العام بالآثار الإنسانية أو بالأحرى اللا إنسانية التي تترتب على عمليات نقل الأسلحة غير المسؤولة أو غير المنظمة. كما أننا أيضا في حدود التفويض طبعا الممنوح لنا وخبرتنا في مجال القانون الدولي الإنساني بنتشرف بتقديم الدعم الفني بشأن إدماج شروط ومبادئ معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة في التشريعات الوطنية، وخاصة فيما يتعلق بنقل الأسلحة على أساس احترام القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان. وتحديدا في هذا الشأن نشرت اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر دليل عملي كامل ومتكامل بعنوان قرارات نقل الأسلحة تطبيق معايير القانون الدولي الإنساني والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان، اللي من وجهة نظري بيجاوب على كل الأسئلة الصعبة، ومن ضمنها المؤشرات التي يجب على الدول أخذها في الاعتبار في تقييم مخاطر نقل الأسلحة، طبعا لو افترضنا حسن النية والكلام طبعا اللي احنا اتكلمنا فيه. يمكن دي في عجاله كانت مداخلتي، واؤكد مره ثانيه ان بصفتي رئيس المكتب الاقليمي للقانون الدولي الانساني بالشرق الاوسط هكون سعيد جدا بتقديم اي دعم فني لاي دوله من منطقتنا الحبيبه ترغب في ذلك، او حتى في الاستجابه لاي دعوه من اعاده النظر في اتفاقيه او معاهده تجاره الاسلحه. واعتقد ان كلنا طبعا هدفنا واحد، وهو اننا نعيش في منطقه امنه سالمه ومستقره، واننا نحد من المعاناة الإنسانية بقدر الإمكان. ويمكن ده حرفيا اللي تم ذكره في المادة 1 من معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة. أنا بشكر حضراتكم على حسن استماعكم، والكلمة لكم سيادة الرئيس.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور عمر مكي على المداخلة القيمة اللي تقدمت فيها. ما في شك أبداً بالجهد يلي بتعمله اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر بالعالم أثناء التحضير للمعاهدة ودخولها حيز تنفيذ، واليوم التعاون بسبيل عولمتها وكل القضايا الأساسية اللي بتخليها معاهدة فاعلة وتخدم قضيتها. نتأمل التعاون المشترك بين منظمات المجتمع المدني المحلي والعالمي في هذه المنطقة لخدمة هالقضية. شكراً جزيلاً لك حيا اللي تقدمت فيه. الدكتورة إما سوبريير، وهي أستاذة محاضرة في معهد الشرق الأوسط للدراسات في جامعة جورج واشنطن، وهي زميلة غير مقيمة لدى معهد دول الخليج العربي في واشنطن. أبحاثها تركزت حول سياسات الأمن والسياسات الخارجية لدول الخليج، أيضاً حول الاقتصاد السياسي لتجارة الأسلحة في دول المنطقة. كما نشرت الدكتورة سوبرييه العديد من المقالات والكتب باللغة الإنجليزية والفرنسية حول مسائل الأمن في الشرق الأوسط ودول الخليج، وهي اليوم أحد أعضاء فريق الأبحاث للمؤسسة العالمية للسلام في جامعة طفت، وحالياً تعمل على مشروع حول مصانع الدفاع والسياسات الخارجية والنزاعات المسلحة. ألف أهلا، ونحن بانتظار لنسمع الكلمة من جانبك. تفضل.
Thank you very much, Fadi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are listening from. And first, I would like to thank the organizers of this roundtable for inviting me to speak today. It is a real honor and a genuine pleasure to have a chance to discuss these crucial topics in such esteemed company and for such an expert audience. During the pandemic era, Zoom has truly helped us instantly universalize our conversations. And in this instance, let us hope it can contribute to help us further universalize the Arms Trade Treaty, the ATT, further expanding it in the most fascinating region of all, the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region. Granted, I am not objective here, having spent the past 13 years dedicating my work to it, but you know, something tells me a couple of you will share this assessment. Why is universalization of the ATT in the MENA region so important? I see three reasons. First, because of the relative weight of this region when it comes to the global arms trade. Second, because of how much this region has been affected, as has been mentioned already, by armed conflict and armed violence that is fueled by sometimes unregulated arms trade and arms transfers. And third, because of the rise of some countries within the region, to your point, maybe, Your Excellency, not only as important arms importers, but also as arms exporters. So to illustrate my first point about the relative weight of the MENA region in the global arms trade, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the SIPRI, that publishes its invaluable database, but also great analysis every year, the Middle East was the second most important region for arms imports in the world over the period 2016 to 2020, with 33% of the total of arms imports in the world, behind another region being Asia and Oceania that accounted for 42%, and well ahead of the third region, Europe, that accounted for 12%. Moreover, that relative regional weight is actually on the rise. Arms imports by state in the Middle East were 25% higher in 2016-2020 than they were in 2011-2015. They are now closing the gap with Asia and Oceania, that has a decreasing relative weight, down from 45% of the total imports in 2011-2015. That relative weight is even more striking when we add North African countries that the CIPRI database actually looks at within the African continent. Africa's two largest arms importers, Algeria and Morocco, accounted for 70% of total African imports of major arms in 2016-2020. Algeria actually made it to the sixth largest arms importer, the sixth place of the largest importers in the world. If you add to this Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, and the UAE that are respectively first place, third place, eighth place, and ninth place, the MENA countries together represented half of the top 10 arms importers in the world over the period 2016-2020. This means that overall, the MENA region actually took 38% of the world's total arms import over that period. Now, despite this relative importance when it comes to the numbers of weapons going to, but also circulating within this region, which is what we've been talking about also, the region still has the lowest rate of membership of the ATT. Increasing transparency and responsibility in a region that is so critical in and for the global arms trade is thus paramount to the continuation of what is recognized by the ATT as the legitimate political, security, economic, and commercial interests of states in the conventional arms trade, but in the best conditions possible for the benefit of actors inside and outside the region. The second reason why expanding the participation of MENA countries in the ATT is so important is linked to the toll that arms conflict and arms violence has taken on this region and on its populations. We are talking here of the most obvious examples, such as the continuous conflicts in Yemen and in Syria, but the region has unfortunately witnessed many more instances of armed conflict and armed violence over the past decade. Now, MENA countries have repeatedly reasserted their commitment to regional peace and stability, and key actors inside and outside government working on these issues know how detrimental to these goals unregulated arms transfers have been. One important point to underline here is the virtuous domino effect becoming parties to the ATT could have on the region. We all know how much of a bad chain reaction some arguments can have, namely, quote, why would we abide by this rule when our enemy or / our competitor is not? A reverse chain reaction is possible, and an increased participation to global regulation treaties could actually create a positive momentum for the entire MENA region. Last, but certainly not least, countries in the MENA region are in fact becoming increasingly key potential parties to the ATT because they are not simply importers, but also rising exporters of conventional arms. Of course, we are thinking here of Israel, an established arms exporter that has seen its share of international arms exports actually rise from 1.9% of the world's total in 2011-2015 to 3% in 2016-2020. That represents an almost 60% jump of the total, in arms export across the world. But we also think, of course, of newer actors that have booming defense industries, such as the United Arab Emirates and Turkey. Those two countries are the two arms suppliers that witnessed the fastest growth from the year 2000 to the period 2015-2019, according to a CIPRI study on emerging suppliers in the global arms trade. The argument here is that these countries and all other countries in the MENA region that are looking to further develop their defense industries and export arms have a clear interest in doing things right from the start, and even perhaps become a model in this respect. It is not a coincidence that these three countries that I named, Israel and the UAE and Turkey, have signed but not yet ratified the ATT. You're halfway there. For the many MENA countries that have not taken the step of signing the treaty yet, an important point to underline here, as has been mentioned by some of my esteemed co-panelists, is that becoming a full signatory member of the ATT is, of course, not the only option. And there are many steps that can be taken to slowly but surely move in this direction. As underlined in an excellent study by Rachel Stoll on the topic, research undertaken about other regions such as Africa and Asia led to important recommendations that also apply to the MENA region. So for instance, non-parties to the ATT can participate in and keep informed about ATT-related meetings. They can also already identify or appoint an ATT national champion. That could be an agency or a senior figure in the civil service, for instance. I will say that at a time when human security across the board and preventing human suffering linked to armed conflict and armed violence has risen to the top of many countries' agendas, and perhaps most crucially in the MENA region, and amidst a global context that has clearly demonstrated the need for nations around the world to further and better cooperate to address the challenges of the future, there is a lot to be said about the relevance and the importance to increase MENA participation in the ATT. And at the end of the day, while all the points and the suggestions discussed here are critical, states are the ones that must make the political decision to pursue joining the ATT. So I hope that the few points I have underlined today help make the case that now is actually a perfect moment to do so or start moving in that direction. And I look forward to further discussing all of this with you. So thank you very much for your attention.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور إما على اللي تقدمتي فيه، كلام علمي دقيق ورائع جدا. بحب أضيف شيء بسيط أنا بهالمسألة، إنه عند تصويت على المعاهدة بالجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة وتبنيها، كان في نص الدول العربية تقريبا مصوتة إيجابا، وهذا بقول إنه بنتوقع إنه هالدول تنضم. لم تنضم، بل هنالك أمر غريب وغريب جدا، أن دولة إحدى الدول الراعية سبونسر لمشروع الاتفاقية يلي المعاهدة يلي تقدم هي دولة المغرب، لم تصدق، لم توقع ولا تصدق ولم تنضم. هنالك أمر أساسي لم يذكر بهالموضوع، أعتقد أنه جوهري أيضا، أن الصدامات المسلحة والحروب التي شهدتها المنطقة من بعد المضي بالاتفاقية غيرت الواقع السياسي وأثارت مخاوف جديدة لم تكن موجودة بالأصل عند إتمام المعاهدة وتقديمها للجمعية العامة والتصويت عليها. كان الحرب بسوريا، الحرب بالعراق، الحرب باليمن، الحرب بليبيا، وحتى التوترات التي شهدتها العديد من دول المنطقة بعد إقرار الاتفاقية، إضافة إلى الهواجس جميعا. بعتقد ذكرها دكتور حسام بشكل يعني ممتاز بهذا السياق. هنالك أمور حصلت استجدت ساهمت بإعاقة عولمة هذه الاتفاقية، أقله إن لم يكن عولمة نص الدول. أنا كنت دائما أنا أعد الدول بشكل دائم ومستمر، مين معنا ومين وسط ومين إيه ومين لا وإلى آخره. ففي دول عديدة كانت متوقع أن تكون عضو، ولا سيما المغرب وتونس وغيرها من الدول التي فضلت التريث في الانضمام إلى هذه المعاهدة. الكلمة الأخيرة هي في مسك الختام مع كنترول آرمز أو الشبكة العالمية لمراقبة الأسلحة مع السيدة عيني، وهي حقيقة بذلت جهد رائع جدا ومشكور جدا خلينا نقول في الأشهر الماضية للإعداد لهذه الندوة اليوم، لهذا المؤتمر اليوم، وهي تحمل هم الاتفاقية المعاهدة وهذه المنطقة، وهي خير من يعكس الحس الموجود لدى التحالف الدولي لمراقبة الأسلحة بحرصه على مشاركة فعلية من رئاسة المؤتمر المشكور جدا بمشاركته، وأيضا أشخاص يعلموا تماما ما الذي يجول في هذه المنطقة، لماذا هذا التحفظ. ولم أجد أفضل من السفير حسام ليعكس حقيقة الواقع بهذا الموضوع، بالإضافة لاختياره لأهم المنظمات بالعالم يلي بتشتغل على كل الصعد، تساعد الدول، تعمل مع منظمات المجتمع المحلي ومع غيرها من المنظمات الدولية، الصليب الأحمر، اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر، وأيضا جانب الأكاديمي دائما حقه محفوظ في هكذا عمل. ألف شكر للجهد يلي حطيتيه عيني، والكلمة لك، تفضلي.
Well, thank you very much, Fadi. And, thanks to you and to Shreen Jurdi for, such close and cooperative collaboration and bringing this roundtable together. And I remember when we first started discussing and organising this roundtable, and we all agreed that it was really important to have a divergence of views, and it was important to understand the different views of the region. And I think on that we've done a very honest job, and it's good to understand the challenges that the Arms Trade Treaty confronts in the region. Before I move on, I want to thank the interpreters. I'm probably about to frustrate them because I'll depart from the text that I provided to them, but they've done an outstanding job in not the easiest circumstances. For those who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Hinaway Luce, and I'm the Control Arms representative, and I'm based in Geneva. I also want to take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to Ambassador Thomas Goebel, who of course we're very much looking forward to working with over the next year, to Dr. Hassam Aldin Ali, who's really come forward with his views, to Dr. Omar Meki, and to Dr. Emma Soubrier. Thank you to each one of you for taking the time to prepare for this event and to participate in it, and for sharing your experience and expertise. Universalization of the Arms Trade Treaty in all regions is a key priority for Control Arms. And it is very true that there is a long way to go. There are very few instruments of international law that have attracted the adherence of all states. And with 110 states parties to the ATT, there is clearly much work ahead of us and much work ahead of us in the MENA region. A number of those 110 states parties are developing countries, and a significant development in recent times was China becoming a state party to the ATT. And, we look forward to, and we'll be very interested to see what China does in terms of reporting and its implementation of the ATT. So clearly this is an area where there is much work to be done. On the Arms Trade Treaty, for civil society, we wanted a stronger treaty, but this is what we've got. This is the instrument of international law that made it through. And for us, we have to make the most of it that we can. it's true that we would have liked to have seen much more in the way of formal support for the treaty in terms of institutional support. We are playing our part in terms of really pushing hard on a key tenet of the treaty, and that is transparency. And it is for this reason that control arms, a key plank of control arms, is the ATT monitor, which reviews all reports submitted under the ATT and identifies good practices, where there are challenges and where there are gaps. Just, a word on implementation and how the treaty moves forward. It is only by being a state party that you can influence the future development and actually how this treaty will develop. And, no treaty is cast in stone. Best practices, common understandings develop, and they help us to understand how a treaty can be best implemented and to strengthen its normative development. So for us, this is very much a work in progress. Implementation work has been slow to get underway. We would have liked to have seen things progress much more quickly, but it has started. And it's really by forming this community under the ATT, by listening to a range of perspectives and moving forward together, that we can actually make progress. Universalization is often, is all too often seen as being a numbers game. And there's a focus on really quick rewards and bringing on those states who, might be seen as easy targets. But for us, universalization is much more than that. Universalization must go hand in hand with implementation. And so if you're a country that is not yet ready to be a state party, what we would ask is that you focus on what are some of the core obligations in this area. And that is the responsible regulation of the arms trade in accordance with international law, demonstrating and actually implementing respect for international humanitarian law and human rights law. And also, back to that all important principle of transparency. Just one other point that I would make about the Arms Trade Treaty, and it is an unusual treaty. It's an unusual treaty in the area of disarmament, and it's an unusual treaty in the area of arms control. And one of the reasons is because of the action that's been taken at the national levels. This is the only treaty that I am aware of where legal cases have been raised against governments due to their permitting export licenses to countries which are not acting in accordance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. So this has really been an innovative development under the ATT. What the ATT has done is provide a hook within countries to raise legal action against governments. And that is happening in several key exporting countries. The exporting of weapons, how the decisions behind the export of weapons is something that continues to be under discussion. We know that this is under discussion amongst key exporters such as the European Union. And it's something that we call for much closer attention and serious action on under the ATT. It's clear from our discussions that we have a long way to go in the universalization of the ATT in the Middle East and North Africa region. But, as the speakers have noted, there are also opportunities. And clearly in this region, there is a need for a deeper understanding of the challenges, and a longer term approach is required. In moving forward on the ATT in the Middle East and North Africa region, we very much look forward to continuing to work with all states and organisations and continuing to have a very open dialogue with the challenges, but also the opportunities. For control arms, today's discussions are only one step in what will be a much longer journey. So with that, Fadi, I wish to thank everybody very much for joining us. It really has been a very interesting discussion, and to thank the panelists once again. And Fadi, I'm handing back to you.
شكرا جزيلا عيني على اللي تقدمت فيه. كان عرض شامل كمان من زاوية المجتمع المدني المناضل للقضية الحقوقية الأساسية يلي عم بعيشها مجتمعاتنا اليوم في هذه المنطقة، وهي قضية الأمن والسلام وتقويض النزاعات المسلحة يلي تقض مضاجع جميع سكان هذه المنطقة يلي همهم الأول أصبح الهجرة وترك أنظمة يعيش مواطنون في ظلها بحقوق إنسان منتهكة بجميع الوجوه. نأمل أن تساهم هذه المعاهدة حقيقة بمزيد من الاستقرار والطمأنينة لهذه المنطقة. يمكن فينا نسمع أي مداخلات، أي أسئلة من المشاركين معنا يلي عددهم ما يقارب 33 يلي بقيوا. يمكن كان معنا حوالي 43 مع البداية. إذا الأسئلة يمكن ترسل عبر الشات أو question and answers كمان. إذا في أي أسئلة للمحاضرين للمتداخلين من الحاضرين. أو حتى يمكن بين المتداخلين إذا في أي استفسار، أي توضيح، أي سؤال بحبوا هي ما عندي على questions and answers. عم اكبس على الايكون، ما عم يطلع عندي no open questions. ما عم شوف.
If I may, there is a question in the chat.
There is a question in the chat. MENA, yes. MENA have encountered رح حول هيدا السؤال لحضرة رئيس المؤتمر يلي أشار حقيقة بكلمته أنه بالأولويات إلى جانب موضوع العولمة هنالك جانب آخر الأند يوزر، يعني هو المستهلك النهائي، الجماعات المسلحة يلي عم يوصلها سلاح، ما هي الضوابط وإلى آخره. فأنا بعتقد هيدا السؤال ممكن يكون الجواب عليه من ناحية رئاسة حضرة رئيس المؤتمر سعادة السفير كوبل. وإذا أي حدا بحب يطرح سؤال يحدد لمين من المشاركين أو من المتداخلين كمان بيكون جيد، ولا عم تتركوا لإلي الخيار لمين بحول أنا السؤال. وإذا أي كان كمان من المتداخلين بحب يضيف أو كمان ياخذ الإيجابي بيقدر. ساعات السفير بتحب إنك تعطي رد على السؤال المطروح.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some audio problems. I think I was not sure that I have already the floor. So perhaps I would like to react also before coming to the question, which I in a certain way I think I have already answered in a certain way, because besides the ATT, I think there are different instruments which are really at the hand of states to improve the root causes for this illicit trafficking of arms in the region, which means is the program of action, certainly, which foresees for very efficient stockpile management. This is certainly one of the major prerequisites to make sure that that these weapons and their ammunition don't fall in the wrong hands. But it's clear that this is not something which addressed the arms trade. It's to say the exports and imports of arms to the region, and therefore it remains certainly crucial to work for universalization of the ATT, what is certainly highly on our agenda. But I would like to make just small comments of what we've heard, and so thank you very much for this excellent presentations we've heard here, and I really learned a lot, and I would especially thank Ambassador Hasan Ali for this insight and in the reasoning also, and the difficulties which are still there in coming closer to the Arms Trade Treaty as it is. We refer to Article 20, and there I would perhaps just combine the two statements. One what Henry Lewis just made, that you can only influence a treaty when you're a member of it. And indeed, we have Article 20 where amendments are possible. We just have seen that there have been so far no amendments proposed to the text of the ATT, but what we also want to do, because we see this not as an expression of satisfaction with the implementation of the treaty, perhaps an expression of satisfaction with the text as it stands, but certainly not when it comes to implementation. So what we are looking for is also during the presidency to have sort of stock taking, to really have a closer look in the achievements and successes also to the shortcomings in implementation, which then could be a basis to look for improvements and to look for fixes which are perhaps necessary to come to a better implementation. It would be interesting perhaps to engage also with observers and countries outside the treaty, but that is a process which is difficult, but that could be something which could be very well also arranged for by perhaps events like the one we had today, because it was very interesting for me at least to listen to the very clear analysis that we've heard from Ambassador Hasan Ali when it comes to the criticism which is still prevailing in the region regarding the treaty. Another point I wanted just to comment on, and that's what you, Mr. Chair, just said. I think we face a problem because you said that the situation has changed with the conflicts increasing the region. Much more openness also in the region when it comes to an accession to the Arms Treaty. It's the beginning. I think that's certainly true, and perhaps the reason which the reasons which should require a strengthened control of the arms trade and arms trafficking in the region. They are at the same time, I think the reasons there for not having the resources, the capabilities to really follow up with this and even to absorb and to make full use of possibilities to implement support and assistance provided. So that's a sort of a vicious cycle, and the thing is really to find ways to break through it. So that's perhaps just the two small comments I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
شكرا سعادة السفير على هالإجابة المستفيضة. إذا بتحب سفير كمان سعادتك دكتور حسام، لأنه يلي سأل السؤال بقول سوري إنه أنا كنت بحب كمان إني أسمع من دكتور حسام. أي إضافة من جانبك مستحب كمان اسمع، تفضل.
With the pleasure. I first want to actually maybe clarify the issue of introducing amendments to the treaty so that it's more realistic, more concrete, more applicable, and more appealing to countries who have chosen not to join it in its current form, which they may see, of course, you can agree with them or not, they may see as a defective, incomplete, and one that lacks balance, is a decision that should be done from within. I mean, those countries that are outside really are not keen about this. This is not our product. This is not really something that we are willing to accept in its incomplete form and adopt a struggle from within to say exactly the same things we said while this was being formulated, and then not be listened to. So exactly, it's a matter of trust, and it's a matter of the countries that are currently within the ATT showing the countries that are not in the ATT the transparency required and the goodwill that is claimed behind this. So I think we're all attentive in this, but the issue and the battle for universalization is very much for those who are already in, not for those who are already out for objective and very realistic reasons which I mentioned. And let me respond to the question put forward about this armed conflicts in the region and non-state actors. There is apparently some big misunderstanding. Many people think that this treaty restricts arms conflict. It prevents it, and it is actually allowing or making sure that arms conflicts are not taking place or are in a weaker intensity. Actually, that's not true. This treaty has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with this. But when we talk about non-state actors, that's exactly the question. In order to make sure that everybody within the ATT or outside the ATT understand this treaty as an instrument to fight non-state actors, the treaty must have a very clear statement, reference, duty that is verifiable by those exporting countries within the arms trade treaty that proves that they are not giving arms to non-state actors. In order for us to have the authority to make sure we control this, we must have a text. We must have a clear-cut commitment, a verifiable one. But the treaty does not come anywhere near this, not for its members, not for its non-members. not for this entire category. There are countries that had their own concerns also with this because they considered it a shortage. The treaty does not address this issue of non-state actors in any effective or clear way that makes it an instrument in limiting the flow of arms or controlling the flow of arms or uncovering the flow of arms from one country to another and leading those arms to end up with non-state actors. But of course, it's always a highly political issue, but it is not one that this treaty has been devised or seen to aim to address, as I recall from the entire negotiations that I was involved in within this treaty. So this is maybe something that is important to see. That the treaty is a good effort done by some very impressive and dedicated diplomats and civil society leaderships and engaged governments who took this seriously and put in their very concrete input addressing this as a product they all wanted to be part of. Eventually, this was not the case, and only one-sided view and imagination of how this treaty should end up was pursued, and it ended up in that form, bringing us to where we stand today. That it's not very acceptable the way it stands for countries that have not signed or ratified it. So I think what we need is very much the same, like this honest discussion that I really commend Control Arms very much for, that really addresses this issue and see where the shortages are and how we can address them and how can we really present this in effect, in implementation, this treaty as an instrument with credibility that adds and contributes something that can be felt and seen by countries that are outside it, making it a tempting regime to be part of. If it addresses a moral case, if it contributes to a good cause, it would be, of course, more appealing. But you need to let countries that are outside the system in MENA region and beyond see this in implementation. In order to do a good marketing, you must have a good product. So I think this is very important that this is the focus. And as I said, the treaty itself foresees way to do this by those who want to make it universal. And of course, we are open and more than willing to engage with you in exchange of views anytime, and like this one, for which I thank you.
شكرا سعادة السفير. للتذكير أننا سنختم هذا اللقاء قبل الساعة 7 أي خلال 10 دقائق من الآن. لدي سؤال إضافي وهو مميز جدا. ما بعرف إذا الترجمة بتحب أن تعمل ترجمة. Who do you think would be the most influential states? أي أكثر دول ممكن تكون مؤثرة that would best promote the ratification. ما هيك بتحب تكملي؟ Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Fadi, just from, this is a good question.
يعني من هي الدولة القائد في المنطقة العربية إذا ما انضمت ينضم الآخرون؟ يعني سؤال حقيقة كثير مميز. يعني ما بعرف هون دكتور إما إذا بتحبي أو دكتور عمر هيك بجواب مختصر. من هي الدولة القائد؟
Yes. I have seen the question. Thank you so much. I will say that the speech that I gave earlier was a beginning of an answer to this question. If only the two most dynamic, rising, exporting countries in the MENA region, namely Turkey and the UAE, were to go from signing but not ratified to ratification of the ATT, I feel like these two countries would certainly be a good example. And I will add that, other countries in the MENA region are now looking or have been looking for a very long time to develop their defense industry. Your Excellency, Egypt has the oldest defense industry in the Arab world. Egypt would certainly be a country that other countries in the MENA region would be following. And that is, I feel, the reason why it is so important for us to have this conversation today with you. And I will take one more minute of the limited time that we have to say that I really appreciated all the points that you put forward, Ambassador. And one of the points that really that my ear perked about is this idea that, you know, the ATT could be used for political abuse of exporting countries towards importing countries. And it surprised me for one reason, which is that today the global arms trade is mostly driven by importing countries. We're talking about a client's market. The exporting countries are, to a certain extent, not only the ones that are setting the rules to the dynamics of the global arms trade. And what I will say is that it's actually a perfect argument for universalization of the ATT, because the more you have countries that sign the ATT and ratify it and actually abide by it, the less you will have any suspicion that there is political abuse, or that, you know, rules apply to certain countries and not other countries, etc. So I will say that this is actually a perfect argument for more transparency of everyone on the global arms trade. Thank you.
شكرا لك دكتورة إما على اللي تقدمتي فيه. السؤال الأخير موجود على question and answer. رح جير هالسؤال لدكتور عمر مكي، وكمان سؤال مميز إذا بتحبي تعملي ترجمة له رجاء كمان ممكن تفضلي. Is there any consideration for the region considered to be most violent while not being producer?
أنا آسف سيد فادي.
دكتور عمر تفضل.
أنا آسف سيد فادي، أنا مش شايف السؤال في الشات بوكس، ولكن أنا كنت رفعت إيدي لحضرتك.
بس هيدا في نوعين من الأسئلة، في على question and answer أيكون تحت فيها هيدا السؤال، حبينا نسمع منك رد له، وأي شيء بتحب تضيفه كمان أنت رافع إيدك. وكمان بالآخر في this region cannot impact the transparency of the ATT. هاي المنطقة ما فيها تأثر على شفافية المعاهدة. تفضل.
Is there any consideration for the region considered؟
كلمة الختام لك دكتور عمر.
طيب أنا هضيف بس نقطة بسيطة على السؤال الأول، لأن أنا حاسس إن هو في غاية الأهمية، بما إن موضوع تواجد الجماعات المسلحة بشكل واسع الانتشار في منطقة الشرق الأوسط طبعا هدد أمن واستقرار المنطقة لفترة طويلة، وإذ ربما برضو زي ما حضرتك تفضلت يا سيد فادي إن ده أثر بشكل كبير جدا على بطء عملية التصديق أو الانضمام لمعاهدة تجارة الأسلحة، بالإضافة طبعا لكل الاعتبارات الأخرى اللي ذكرها سيادة السفير. أنا حابب بس أقول إن في ظل طبعا عندنا تجارة الأسلحة، يمكن المادة 11 هي أقرب مادة يجوز أن تنطبق على فكرة الجماعات المسلحة بفكرة تغيير واجهة الأسلحة، ولكن حتى لو الدولة غير منضمة إلى معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة، الجماعات المسلحة لا تعمل في فراغ قانوني. الجماعات المسلحة لا زالت ملتزمة بالقانون الدولي الإنساني، يعني هي ملزمة به، غير ملتزمة، أنا آسف، ملزمة. ومن ناحية أخرى هي أيضا ملزمة بالقانون الدولي بصفة عامة. حضراتكم أكيد اللي متابع حضراتكم المشهد على القانون الدولي يعلم جيدا أن محكمة العدل الدولية أصدرت حكم في قضية نيكاراغوا الشهيرة بتتكلم على نفس الموضوع ده تحديدا، دعم الدول بالسلاح إلى جماعات مسلحة في أراضي وسيادة دولة أخرى يعد انتهاك للقانون الدولي العام. وهنا السؤال تحديدا كان بيسأل على البدائل في ظل عدم وجود تنسيق وتنظيم واضح للجماعات المسلحة في معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة. نلجأ للقانون الدولي، القانون الأم اللي هو من ضمنه معاهدة تجارة الأسلحة. ومن ناحية أخرى هو المادة الأولى المشتركة اللي أنا ذكرتها في مداخلتي اللي بتلزم الدول الثالثة اللي هم الدول الداعمة حتى لو مش طرف مباشر في النزاع ان هم لا يدعموا جماعات مسلحه ممكن تنتهك القانون الدولي الانساني. واكد تاني على نقطه سعاده السفير ان معاهده تجاره الاسلحه لم يكن الغرض منها ابدا منع نشوب نزاعات مسلحه او حتى ايقافها، ولكن مجرد تنظيم تجاره الاسلحه. فده من جانب. الجانب الثاني اللي ذكرته السيده بسنت في فكره الدوله على القائد زي ما حضرتك تفضلت يا سيد فادي. اعتقد ان فعلا التغيير لازم يكون من الداخل، او الصراع من الداخل، من داخل الدول الاطراف في معاهده تجاره الاسلحه. واحنا نسعد بمساعده السفير توما جوبت اللي يقدر يقود الفكره دي تحديدا، فكره التغيير او التعديل او حتى التفاعل مع الانتقادات اللاذعه اللي جزء كبير جدا منها مشترك. ويمكن زي ما الزميله هاين واي قالت من كنترول ارمز ان هي اتس ورك ان بروجرس، والبروجرس ده احنا نحب نشوفه ونتفاعل عليه، ويمكن يكون ده استمرار للنقاش تحت مظله جامعه الدول العربيه مثلا، مش بالضروره لدعم معاهده تجاره الاسلحه ولكن لطرح الانتقادات مره ثانيه امام الدول، ونسمع منهم لو كان عندهم لسه نفس الهواجس، نفس الملاحظات والانتقادات، ونبتدي نتفاعل معاها مع رئاسه المؤتمر القادم الدوره الثامنه. فده اعتقد دي الافكار اللي انا حبيت اشاركها في النهايه، وبشكر حضراتكم لحسن استماعكم، وانا اسف للمترجمين على سرعه الكلام، لكن حضرتك برضو لما قلت لي ان فاضل دقيقتين فانا اضطريت ان انا اسرع شويه. انا اسف.
شكرا دكتور عمر على اللي تقدمت فيه، واكيد متامل التزام يعني احتراما لوقت الجميع. دكتور حسام، في سؤال اخير لك رجاء باختصار تننهي قبل السبعه. تفضل دكتور حسام.
ما هو السؤال؟
في سؤال لك امباسادور حسام الدين. Are you against amendments؟ هل انت ضد التعديلات؟ And are more pro advocating for a whole new round of discussions for a new treaty. السؤال على الشأن.
Of course, I've seen it. Thank you very much, Fadi. As we say, of course, this is a decision that is only for the Arms Trade Treaty member states. We are not members in the treaty. My country is not, so I think objectivity dictates that it's a decision that countries within the treaty are to make, and not anyone else. So I really have no view on this. I put this forward as one of the ways out if universality is the target. This is one of the channels and the routes that are essential in pursuing or looking at providing for the elements required for this universality or preconditions for this universality. The treaty as it stands, I had my very doubts that it would achieve universality, of course, the way it is. But it's not my decision. Finally, Fadi, as this is drawing back, I want to thank you so much. And I want to say that really, I enjoyed very much interacting with the very impressive speakers you have managed to combine. And I want to thank Ambassador Gurbel, Dr. Omar, Dr. Emma, Hinwai, and yourself for this very interesting, sincere discussion that I think has moved our discussion on this forward in a significant way. So thank you for this and for your encouragement for this constructive discussion to take place. Thank you.
اسمحوا لي أختم هاللقاء بجزيل الشكر لحضرة الرئيس سعادة السفير جوبل، وبالتأكيد سعادة السفير حسام الدين علي، وأيضا الأستاذ دكتور عمر ودكتور إما، وبالتأكيد للمنظمين كنترول آرمز لحقيقة التحسس بهالموضوع بغاية الأهمية لهالمنطقة. نتأمل أنه هالمنطقة تعيش السلام يلي بتتمناه، شعوبها بيستحقوا ذلك. وبالتأكيد كل المشاركين معنا بهذا اللقاء، وفينا نقول إلى اللقاء والمنطقة أكثر أمانا وسلاما. إذا في أي شيء هيني بتحب تضيفيه أنا انتهيت. وأكيد الشكر للمترجمات يلي كانوا جدا رائعات وأوصلوا الأفكار بشكل رائع جدا.
Thank you, Fadi.
Fadi, thank you very much. And, so I think there was a question about what was the purpose of this meeting. And, the purpose was to have a really open and frank discussion. And, you know, we really look forward to following up with everybody who has joined today and working together with all partners to take forward what is a critical treaty in the MENA region. So thanks very much, Fadi, and thanks to everybody else.